911. What's your emergency? I I killed my father. Sir, where is your father now? In pieces. What started as a routine emergency call would soon unravel into one of the most disturbing cases in recent history. A respected Army soldier. A brutal, methodical crime. And a DNA test that uncovered a betrayal so profound, it shattered everything he believed about his life. But this wasn't just about a murder. This was about the kind of truth that destroys families. The question wasn't just why he did it, but whether anyone in his place would have done the same. April 12th, 2009. A quiet neighborhood in South Atlanta. The kind of place where everyone knew each other, where nothing ever seemed out of place. Inside this house, police were about to uncover a crime so disturbing that even veteran homicide detectives would later admit they had never seen anything like it before. The man who made that call was 30-year-old Army specialist Keon Andre Jackson. A disciplined soldier, a devoted father of four, a man who had spent years idolizing his own father, 51-year-old Henry Lee Jackson. For years, Keon believed his father was his greatest role model. But what if everything he thought he knew was a lie? Neighbors recalled nothing out of the ordinary that day. No loud arguments, no warning signs. But behind the front door, inside a dimly lit living room, officers found blood. On the walls, the floor, the furniture. Henry Jackson's body had been cut apart. Keon didn't run. He didn't resist. He turned himself in just hours later, walking into the Atlanta Police Department covered in blood. When asked why he did it, he didn't say a word. But investigators would soon uncover the reason. A reason so unthinkable that it would leave even those closest to the case questioning everything. What could drive a seemingly stable soldier to commit an unspeakable act? The answer lay in a DNA test that revealed a betrayal no one was prepared for. April 15th, 2009, South Atlanta. A neighbor places a call to 911 just after 8 a.m. She says she hasn't seen Henry Jackson since the day before. His car is still in the driveway, his mail untouched. But it was the smell, a thick, suffocating odor drifting from the open garage, that made her uneasy. The moment police entered the home, they knew something was wrong. And then, in the kitchen, they found the first bag. Henry Jackson wasn't missing. He had been dismembered. Inside those bags, detectives found the remains of a man who, just 24 hours earlier, was alive, speaking, laughing, a father, a grandfather. The brutality of the crime was unlike anything local authorities had seen before. At 9:47 a.m., a man walked into the precinct, his hands covered in dried blood, his clothes stiff, his eyes blank. He didn't ask for a lawyer. He didn't demand to see his family. He simply looked at the officer in front of him and said, "I killed my father." Detectives were in disbelief. The man standing before them wasn't some unhinged stranger. He was a decorated soldier, a man with no history of violence, no criminal record. But when officers asked him why, he said nothing. For hours, Keon Jackson refused to answer. He sat staring ahead, his expression unreadable. He acknowledged what he had done, but not why. And then, when investigators shifted the conversation, everything changed. It was a routine test, an at-home DNA kit, the kind people use every day to confirm their heritage, trace their family roots. But when Keon opened his results, what he found was not family history. It was a secret, one so deeply buried that it would destroy everything he knew about his past. His children, the 4 kids he had raised, loved, and protected, were not biologically his. The match. Henry Lee Jackson, his own father. The DNA test had confirmed the impossible. His father, the man he had trusted his entire life, had been sleeping with his wife. And not just once, for years. 4 children, the truth hidden in plain sight, and no one had ever told him. According to prosecutors, the discovery unraveled him. His wife had denied the affair, claimed he was paranoid. His father had refused to answer his calls. The betrayal was absolute. On the night of April 14th, 2009, Keon Jackson drove to his father's house. He walked through the front door. He stood in the living room, facing the man who had taken everything from him. And at 9:15 p.m., Keon made his decision. It wasn't a fight. There was no struggle. No words exchanged. There was only silence. And when it was over, Henry Jackson was dead. Detectives described Keon Jackson's demeanor as disturbingly calm. When he walked into the police station, there was no panic, no visible remorse. But was this a calculated killing? A cold-blooded execution? Or was this something else entirely? A man who had been pushed to the absolute breaking point. The justice system would have to decide. But for investigators, one question lingered. But there was more to the story. This wasn't just about betrayal. It wasn't just about a crime of passion. How long had this secret been buried? Had someone else known the truth all along? Why does a man kill his own father? Is it rage, justice, or something deeper? April 15th, 2009, Atlanta police charge 30-year-old Army Specialist Keon Andre Jackson with first-degree murder. From the beginning, 2 competing theories emerged. To some, it was simple, a moment of uncontrollable rage, the kind of fury that can only come from discovering a betrayal so devastating it warps a man's sense of reality. The truth had shattered Keon's world. His 4 children, his pride, his purpose, were not his. They belonged to his own father. Prosecutors argued that the discovery was too fresh, too raw, for Keon to have planned the killing. He had been blindsided, humiliated, robbed of his identity as a father. That night, in his father's house, the anger took over. A trauma of this magnitude can completely override logical thinking. At that moment, Keon Jackson wasn't processing consequences. He was reacting. His entire world had collapsed in seconds. But there was another theory, one far more unsettling. Keon Jackson didn't kill his father the night he found out. He waited. What was said in that conversation remains unknown, but some believe Keon had already decided what needed to be done. This wasn't a sudden outburst. It was methodical. The body was dismembered, carefully bagged. That's not blind rage. That's a man making sure there's no coming back from what he's done. A man in shock, or a man who knew exactly what he was doing. The timeline of this betrayal stretched back further than anyone realized. How long had this been going on? And how much did Keon's mother know? During the trial, a detail emerged, one that left the jury silent. Did you ever suspect your husband was sleeping with your son's wife? I don't know. But was that the truth? Or was this secret buried long before Keon ever knew? Then, another discovery, one that changed everything. Buried in old case files, detectives found allegations against Henry Jackson dating back decades. Rumors of inappropriate relationships, whispers that never turned into formal charges. Was Keon Jackson's father always hiding something? And if authorities had investigated years earlier, could this murder have been prevented? For prosecutors, none of this mattered. The only question was whether Keon Jackson planned this murder, or if he simply snapped. The trial was coming to a close. The evidence had been presented, the testimonies given. But even now, one question remains. Was this an act of justice or vengeance? Was this an act of pure rage or a carefully planned execution? And if you were in his place, what would you have done? On December 10th, 2010, after months of testimony, forensic analysis, and psychological evaluations, the trial of Keon Andre Jackson came to an end. The prosecution argued that this was not a crime of passion. This was revenge, calculated, deliberate, and carried out with precision. Keon didn't just kill his father, he made sure there was no coming back from it. The level of violence in this crime speaks for itself. This was not a man who lost control. This was a man who knew exactly what he was doing. But the defense fought back. They painted a picture of a man whose world had been shattered beyond repair. A man who had lived his entire life under the shadow of his father, only to find out that shadow had consumed everything he held dear. The human mind has limits. For some people, betrayal of this magnitude isn't just emotional, it's psychological. It rewires the way they see the world. It can trigger an almost primal response. The jury deliberated for 2 days. In the end, the verdict was read. Judge, we, the jury, find the defendant guilty of second-degree murder. The prosecution had pushed for first-degree murder, but the jury stopped just short. They believed Keon acted with intent, but they also believed his actions were driven by something deeper than revenge. Keon Jackson has been sentenced to 40 years in prison with the possibility of parole after 25. The courtroom remained silent as the sentence was handed down. Some betrayals cut so deep, they leave scars that never heal. But does betrayal ever justify murder? Keon Jackson had been a model soldier, a father, a man who had spent his entire life believing in duty, loyalty, and honor. But in the end, what destroyed him wasn't war or violence from an enemy. It was the truth. The kind of truth that doesn't just break a man, it erases him. This case wasn't just about the law. It wasn't just about guilt or innocence. One man was dead, the other condemned to spend decades behind bars. But in the eyes of the law, who was the real victim? Psychologically, Keon Jackson was a man at war with himself. His entire life had been built on a lie, and in the end, that lie took everything from him. Was justice served? If you were on the jury, how would you have ruled? One betrayal, one murder, and one question that lingers long after the trial has ended. Did Keon Jackson deserve 40 years in prison? Or was he a man who had already been sentenced the moment he opened that DNA test? Now we turn the question over to you. Do you think the punishment fit the crime? Was this an act of cold-blooded murder? Or was this a man who simply broke?
Let us know your thoughts in the comments below.